Hi everyone, this is 1 Year On. I'm Alison, and following on from previous episodes, today's episode continues my interview series. I'm fortunate to be interviewing the CEO of Posit Science, Dr Henry Mahncke. Posit Science is the company that's built and runs Brain HQ. Brain HQ is an interactive brain training platform which is like a gym for the brain. I'll let Henry tell us more about that. Henry has worked with Posit Science for over 20 years and within neuroscience since the early 2000s. Welcome to 1 Year On, Dr. Mahncke. I'm so glad you could join us.
Fantastic, Alison. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Thank you. So firstly, can we tell listeners who are new to Brain HQ how you would describe this app and what it's designed to do?
Yeah, so to talk about Brain HQ, which is fundamentally a set of brain training exercises built on the idea of brain plasticity, with your permission, I'm going to take a step back and talk a little bit about brain plasticity and what all that means. So, as you mentioned, Alison, I'm a neuroscientist. I did a PhD at the University of California, San Francisco. And I started my PhD in the early 1990s. And when I started there, this may amaze you and some of your listeners, but we were all taught as fresh-faced young graduate students that, hey, the adult brain was hardwired like a computer chip, right? And we were told that, hey, kids' brains can change and reorganize, right? We all know that a kid's brain kind of has to build itself. And, that's why kids learn a language really quickly, and kids actually have remarkable abilities to recover from quite significant brain injuries. But we were all told that at the age of 7 or maybe 15 or 21, no one knew exactly when, but there was definitely an age we were told, hey, this critical window for brain plasticity is closed, and after that, the brain is hardwired, and all it does after that is it just wears out over time. Synapses go away, brain cells die, connections are lost. It is a one-way street. And hey, some people decline faster, some people decline slower, but you're all declining. And hey, if you get a brain injury, it's mostly not going to get better. In fact, I was specifically told that when you drank, it killed brain cells, and you didn't want to do that because you weren't getting any more. So that was the state of the science in the early 1990s.
Sounds quite depressing.
It really was. However, I joined the lab of a remarkable scientist named Dr. Michael Mahncke, and Mike is, if anything, an optimist. And he was in the middle of just leading an absolute revolution in how we think about how the brain works. And he was leading that revolution and pointing out that, hey, this can't be how it works, right? The adult brain has to be able to rewire and rebuild itself. And, he got started on that journey because in the late 70s and early 80s, he was part of an incredible team at UCSF that cured deafness. And that's a remarkable thing to say, but he was on one of the teams, there were several around the world, that invented the cochlear implant, which, as you and your listeners may know, is fundamentally a medical device that can be implanted into the inner ear, and it fundamentally replaces the part of the ear that transduces sound waves coming in into electrical impulses going to the brain. And so they invented this device, and, they knew they had invented, not a good one at first, right? It's their first try. How good could it be? And so they had gotten the approval, and they did the surgery, and then implanted it in their first patient. And they thought, it's going to be an amazing victory if this person is able to hear like a clap, right? And in fact, that was true. That worked, and they all celebrated. But they never thought this person would relearn the ability to understand speech. And the reason for that is speech is full of all this very fast information and time and all these rapid changes of frequency. And like I said, they built a pretty bad cochlear implant on their first try. And so it was remarkable that after just a few weeks of having the cochlear implant implanted, hey, that person was actually able to understand simple, slow speech. And Mike Mahncke just talks about this moment just like a light bulb going off in his head, because he's a humble person. And he said, look, I knew it wasn't because we built a great implant. It must be because this person's brain had rewired itself. The brain itself had changed in some way to take advantage of this different, not very good, but still there information and turn that into the ability to comprehend speech. So that was really the thing that kicked off Mike's view on this. And then he and his lab did experiments, collaborators from around the country and around the world did experiments. And hey, we're now in the year of our Lord 2026. And hey, everybody knows the adult brain can change and rewire itself, right? Mike went on to win the Kavli Prize in Neuroscience, where you get a gold medal handed to you by the King of Norway for your, advancements in the field. It's extremely cool. And so, that basic viewpoint, that changes everything, right? Once you understand that you can rewire the brain and make it more healthy by asking the brain to do the right things with the right kind of information, all of a sudden you realize, well, if I ask the brain to do the right things, if I train the brain in the right ways, one might say, I can probably rebuild and rewire and make the brain healthier in all kinds of ways. And that's exactly what Brain HQ is. We spun this idea out of UCSF. Mike called me up one day. I was at work at another job and said, hey, Henry, we've helped a lot of rats build better brains. We've helped a lot of monkeys build better brains. I just think it's time to help some people build some better brains. Okay, that sounds good to me. And so that's what Brain HQ is. It's like applied brain plasticity, right? And so then to finally get around to answering your question, you might ask, okay, well, fine. How do you build a brain plasticity-based training exercise? What does that look like exactly? And so this is an audio podcast, and there are actually a lot of auditory exercises in Brain HQ, because Mike actually was, of all things first, an auditory neuroscientist himself. So one of the core auditory exercises in Brain HQ is an exercise where you're going to hear a pair of little whistle sounds. And I'll try and make one of these whistle sounds here if I can. So one of them might go up, like, and another one might go down, like, well, I didn't do that too well. Could you hear it all right, Alison?
Yeah, I could.
Great. And so when you do this exercise, you hear a pair of those, and hey, they both might be up or they both might be down, or they can mix and match, right? And all you have to do is say, well, the first one went up and the second one went down, right? And so that doesn't sound too hard. And for sure, when those sounds are big and slow and there's a lot of time between them, hey, anyone's brain can do it. So you do it and you get it right first. But this is brain training. When you get it right, we make it a little harder. Now, I'm not going to whistle this. It's too hard for me. But we make the sounds shorter and quicker, and we bring them closer together. And as we do that, it actually gets harder and harder. And why does it get harder? Well, it gets harder because if a brain has become older, right, through the natural process that all of us go through, our brains actually kind of get noisy. And what I mean by that is information processing is kind of slower. It's kind of messier. And so information gets kind of muddled together in space and time. And that happens as we get older, but it also happens in a lot of neurological conditions. People who have multiple sclerosis have this kind of noisy brain. People who have HIV-associated neurocognitive disorder have this kind of noisy brain. People who've had brain injury or stroke have this kind of noisy brain. So one way or the other, the brain is like a noisier information processor now. So when those two sounds come in, hey, if you're 21 years old and you're at the peak of your brain health game, they can come in very fast and you will hear them both. But if you're like a lot of people who got older or had a health event, they might come in so fast that noisy brain just can't sort out which one was which one came first. Were there even two of them? I only heard one. So it gets hard. Now, as soon as it gets hard, the brain training exercise backs off. It separates them out, makes them a little slower, further apart, and now you can do it again. And you kind of bounce around this zone where you can kind of get most of them right, but you're going to get a few of them wrong, and that's what drives brain plasticity, right? Your brain is going to adaptively reorganize itself when it gets that kind of challenge. Right? So that's how the exercises in Brain HQ work across your auditory senses, your visual senses, multimodal senses. There's dozens of exercises in Brain HQ. They target attention and speed and memory and decision making and social cognition and all these things. But one way or the other, they're all designed to make your brain more faster and more accurate that way. And you might say to me, oh yeah, go ahead.
I remember, so I was going to say, I remember they were very challenging. I remember, you had said when we spoke before that they're challenging for a reason, because that's the Goldilocks point, as where you actually have a sweet spot where learning or neuroplasticity works best. That it is actually
That's
challenging.
Exactly right. Your brain, it's a very common thing that comes back to me at Brain HQ. Hey, this is really challenging, right? And some people are like, hey, I love it because I enjoy the challenge. Sometimes people are like, wow, this is not what I was expecting. But it does have to be challenging, right? Think about it this way. If you ask your brain to do something you're already very, very good at, right? Your brain does not need to rewire itself, right? It can just do that, right? There's no need to change. On the other hand, if you ask your brain to do something that's essentially impossible, well, your brain also doesn't need to rewire. It can't even kind of get a grasp of the task. And so you do have to be in this domain, and this is why the training has to be adaptive and personalized, because everyone's brain is different, and everyone's brain is different at all of these dozens of challenging tasks, right? But you do have to be in a zone where you're getting, 70 to 80% of them right, and, 20 or 25 or 30% of them wrong to drive that kind of brain change. But you have to think about the challenges as something that it feels good, right? You think about when you're exercising, right? If you can already, go for a walk around the block and you don't challenge yourself, well, you're not going to get any fitter, or you're not going to get healthier. At the same time, if you're like me and someone tells you to run a marathon, you're like, well, I cannot run a marathon. I'm sorry. It doesn't really matter what you ask. So you have to find that right level in between those. Like, hey, what's the level of fitness? I need to sweat. I need to be tired at the end of it. But if I'm doing that, then, hey, I'm getting exercise, I'm improving my physical health. Improving brain health works precisely the same way. Now,
It is that Goldilocks spot,
Yep.
isn't it? And there was a specific term that you used about that.
Some people call it the zone of proximal development, but that's a little bit of an elaborate term. So I like your term, the Goldilocks zone, quite well, right? It has to be not too hard, not too
right.
easy. It has to be just right. Now, you might hear those whistles and say, well, hey, Henry, why are you trying to make my brain listen to whistles? What good does that do me? And, to answer that question, we actually have to turn to the science of psychoacoustics, which is a word I absolutely love. And this is another thing we can actually do on pure audio like this. So if you take your finger, your index finger and your thumb, and you put them, just one hand, and you put them on your voice box, and you make the sound ba, like a bottle. Ba,
Ba.
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 Perfect.
Ba.
If you do that, you can feel that your lips open and your voice box starts to vibrate at right about the same time. Ba. Now I'll ask you to make a different sound. I'm asking you to make the sound da, like my da-da. Or actually, sorry, let me do it even easier. Well, let's do pa, like my pa-pa. Pa.
Okay, pa.
And when you do that, you can feel your lips open and a little puff of air starts to come out right before your voice box starts to vibrate. It's not a big gap, but there's a gap there. And that gap is only 20 or 30 milliseconds long. Now, you're going to be delighted to know that there are scientists all over the world who have made their life's career studying these ba's and pa's and da's and ga's and shah's and la's and wa's and everything under the sun. And what has become clear then is that if you're going to understand human speech, not just in English, but in any language, your brain needs to be able to notice and process really short information on the order of those tens of milliseconds. And in fact, the little sound that your voice box makes that makes the b or the p sound, inside of that sound, if you look with a fancy audio analyzer, you will see actually little frequency sweeps. Inside of that, there are little sounds going up and down. And so the reason we train your brain with that is not that we want you to listen to whistles. It's fine, I don't care. But we want to essentially pre-train your brain so that when you go on to hear human speech, your brain is ready and fast and accurate for like exactly the kind of sound that's going to come in. So then when you go to the store, right, and your partner says to you, hey, I want you to get some pencils and some bananas, right? Instead of having that smirky, slow, noisy brain where that information comes in and it kind of gets bungled up a little bit, and by the time you get to the store, you're like, wait, what was I supposed to get? You've got that fast, accurate brain, and when those sound waves come in and they turn into electrical impulses in your brain, it's sharp, it's fast, it activates your attention, it activates your memory, and then when you get to the store, hey, you remember it's pencils and bananas for whatever reason. So that's kind of what we're doing with Brain HQ. We're like building the foundations, you can say, of cognitive performance, right? We're not teaching you how to remember a list of things. We're rewiring the brain so it's better at doing things like remembering a list of things. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much for listening. If you've liked this episode, please like, share and subscribe and leave a comment. Next time we'll be back to continue the interview with Henry Mahncke. It's a very interesting series of parts of the interview. I can't post them all as one. I've had to split them up. Thank you. Bye.